I'm so excited that I get to moderate this panel about breeding and breed diversity because the sheep in California and surrounds, Nevada, Oregon, our wool varietals are absolutely as diverse and fascinating as our wine and cheese and other varietals. And so I'm really excited that we're going to get the chance to hear about those from the folks who are doing some really, really interesting work with some really interesting sheep. And on our panel today, we have, moving from farthest away from me toward me, we have Jill Hackett. Am I right? I thought I know you from shearing days. We have Dan Macon. And we have Lisa Leonard and Janet Heppler. So welcome. Give them a big round of applause. Okay, and the first question, we're going to have about 2 minutes for this one. If you could, beginning with Jill, I think, describe what kind of sheep you raise, the size of your operation, and then your particular interest and focus within this field, whether it's contract grazing or fine fiber or heirloom breeds or something else entirely.
Okay, well, I'm from Humboldt County. We live up near Ferndale, California, and we live really near the coast, really steep, rough ground, real similar to New Zealand. And we run Perrindale sheep, which probably you have not heard of. They are a breed that was originated in New Zealand, and it's a Cheviot Romney cross. And they really fit our climate perfectly. They're real super hardy, easy care. They have a micron count of about low 30s. And they have a really nice firm wool that dyes really nicely. It's a nice white wool, just like a Cheviot would be. We have about 800 breeding ewes, and our primary focus is meat, but we've just kind of switched our focus over since we've gotten into the Perrindales. To try to direct market some of our wool because it's super, super nice wool. And there aren't very many sheep. There's probably, I think we have the only registered Perrindale flock in the U.S., and there's just a few other people that have a handful of Perrindales. So we pasture lamb in March and April, and we do our shearing about June 1st. The cleanliness of the fiber is pretty important, so we try to do it before the grass dries up. And I guess that's about it.
Great, thank you. Dan.
I'm sorry that you all have to stare at the reflection off my very bald head. It's the result of a prolonged drought. We are in the Sierra foothills, northeast of Sacramento. We're in the Auburn area. And so we're in the wintertime entirely on annual grasslands and shrublands. And in the summer, when we can find it, we're on irrigated pasture. We are considerably smaller than we were going into the drought. We've reduced our sheep numbers by about 2/3, partly because of the drought, and then as a consequence of having fewer sheep, I also work full-time, and I'm going to grad school. So I think I'll sleep sometime in 2020.
Yeah.
But we use a 3-tier breeding system that's used quite a bit in the United Kingdom. So we have a couple of different white-face breeds that we use as our foundation. In England, they would be called hill breeds, so we use Cheviots primarily for their hardiness and for the variety of diet that they will consume. And then we breed those with blue-faced Leicester rams to get mules, and the bulk of our ewe flock are mules. And they really maximize our hybrid vigor. They're tremendous mothers. Our primary product is meat, and so having that hybrid vigor in terms of our lambs is also a big part of what we do. In England, typically those mules would be bred to a Texel or some other type of terminal ram. And after a number of years of experimenting, This last year, we bought a handful of Groverman Shropshires from Petaluma, and we're using a Shropshire buck as our terminal cross and then breeding some registered Shropshires as well. And am really, really pleased with that breeding. They're tremendous lambs and tremendous sheep. We also pasture lamb, and I'll talk a little more about what that means in terms of breeding and selection. But we lamb in late February through the end of March, which means we shear almost every year on Mother's Day. I have a very understanding wife. We were talking this morning, actually, in an animal science class I took, I was told to get to know your vet really well if you're going to raise sheep. So I sleep with mine. And fortunately, she's my wife, too. But it's kind of a family operation. Everybody chips in. My oldest daughter just started at Montana State, and our youngest daughter has shown sheep since she was old enough to walk around. So it's definitely a family operation.
Thank you. Lisa?
Yeah, I think I've got.
Yeah.
We switched two people in the today at the last minute, so I apologize for jumping around. This is Lisa.
We're in Yolo County, up in the Capay Valley. I raise heritage Navajo Churro sheep. I've got about 450 to 500 at any one time. We primarily raise them for meat, although we do shear a lot. We shear twice a year because they grow a lot of wool. And let's see, we lamb at least twice a year, sometimes 3 times a year. They'll breed out of season, so we try to kind of stagger the lambs coming in throughout the year so that I always have a steady supply of meat for my customers. Most of the meat that we produce is direct marketed to folks. My partner is also very understanding. I've turned him into a shearer. So in the second slide, that's him navigating some of the Navajo Churro rams, which is a dangerous operation. You can see why I can't get anyone else to do it. I really, really enjoy the Navajo Churro sheep. They're flexible. They go from a rich diet this time of year, which they do very well on, to very dry grasses and shrubs and, weeds in late summer that a lot of sheep would turn their nose up to. And they, thrive, with that range of diet. And that really helps in our region. We get really, really hot in the Capay Valley, like 110, 115 degrees. So needed a sheep that could withstand that. The other thing, I think on my last slide, I just show some of the various terrain that we graze in. A lot of that is our property, but we also graze some of the organic farms around us. So we graze off cover crops, graze down almond orchards to keep the weeds out of there. I've got several hillsides that I'll graze for neighbors just to help keep fire danger down. So we've really tried to reach out into the community and complement each other. They need the grasses grazed, and my sheep are more than happy to do it. So
Thank you so much. Janet, how about you?
I'm Janet Heppler. I live in Covelo, which is east of Willits. Been raising merino sheep for since 1992. Gene Neer was a big inspiration for me. I had llamas and Angora goats before that, but I really wanted to raise a fleece that was soft against my skin and natural colored. And I could not find that at the time. And Gene had been doing natural colored sheep for a while and decided to get a couple of sheep from her, and that's what started my flock. I've had different numbers over the years. Currently have about 55, and the Angora goats are gone now. They've gone to new homes. But I used to run about 90 head of merino sheep and approximately 40 Angora goats. I'm focusing on the hand spinner market and also the yarn market, and so I want a fairly fine, soft wool, and I think I finally achieved that with the natural colors. I use guardian dogs, and another key item to keeping that wool clean is that I have them all coated. It is a hard chore. And many times I'll go out in the evening to bring the sheep back into the barn and find them tangled up or towing along their coat, and have to do a big tackle to get the coat off and then get a new one on them. Trying to think what else here. Martin Daly was a big influence for me also. He was working at the Hopland Field Station when I started, and he was doing different breeding projects there with fine wool and AIing at the time. So I've had him AI for me over the years 3 different times with Australian Merino semen to really improve my sheep, because my original sheep were Corriedale Merino crosses, and now over time they're what I consider pretty much 100% Merino.
Thank you so much. I know some of you have touched on this already, but in just a couple of minutes, if you could touch on your breeding efforts more and what considerations you're making related to the health of your flock, because we know so much of this depends on the health of the animals, and the quality of your wool and lamb meat. Jill?
Okay, well, since there's no other Parendales here, we've been AIing ours with New Zealand semen. And since there's so many Parendale sheep over there, and they keep such great production records, you can select sires based on their micron count, the amount of pounds of wool they shear, which are very highly heritable. And you can also select, they do foot scores, DAG scores, which means are they prone to worms perhaps. What else do they do? A lot of meat, days to fattening, that type of stuff. So we have a pretty good selection there. So we're always hoping to get a couple nice stud rams out of that breeding. And as far as the health of our animals, we lamb on pasture, which is natural for those sheep. They're really well adapted to that system. So we're lambing when they're naturally in the best shape. And we do wean our lambs early. We don't, as soon as the grass dries up, we wean our lambs, because we do have some nice bottom ground that they can go on. No, that's our hill ground. I don't know that I sent you any pictures of the bottom ground. It's a river bottom, which is right in the middle of Derry, USA, in Ferndale Valley. And then as far as keeping our wool quality, we're shearing when the grass is still green. We skirt really, really heavily. And most our purebred Parendale wool we've started making some yarn with. But what I call our commercial, which would be our straight Cheviot sheep or Dorset or Romneys, that goes up to Montague to Wool Gatherer Carding Mill, and they make bedding and wool mattresses with that. And they want really clean wool, and they pay extra for that. That's
great. Jill's being humble. She's a
Probably
really
about
expert skirter and classer. I've seen her work. And a great photographer. Dan, how about yourself, your breeding efforts, the health of your flock?
Touched on this a little bit, but we operate entirely on leased land, and so our sheep have to move a lot. We also pasture lamb, and about 8 years ago, we started using a system that's used pretty widely in the UK called Easy Care lambing record keeping. And so we track all of our ewes on 3 parameters, and I think one of the ways you know you've moved from a hobby to a business is if you can ship your favorite ewe because she doesn't score well enough on your Easy Care scorecard. She's got a lamb on her own. She's got to take care of 2 lambs, sometimes 3, and she's got to produce enough milk on the kind of feed that we have. And so if she doesn't measure up, she doesn't get to stay, and her daughters don't get to stay. And as a consequence, we have a flock that has some amazing maternal abilities. We also, because we're on highly fragmented landscape where nobody has really kept up infrastructure, predators are a big issue for us. We use livestock guardian dogs primarily. I found that Llama's strategy in our system is to point out the slow sheep to the coyotes, which isn't ideal. And based on what Fish and Game tells us, we'll be a little behind Humboldt County, but we'll probably have wolves back in our environment in the next 10 years based on a meeting I was at yesterday. So predators are a big deal for us. The other major issue that we select pretty hard for, because we're on summer irrigated pasture, is foot rot resistance. And we have, I think, mostly cleared that problem up in our environment, primarily by using Cheviot and blue-faced Leicester sheep. And I think that's, at least in my experience, the only way to eradicate foot rot is to use genetics. Otherwise, it's always there.
Thank you so much. Lisa.
Since we raise Navajo Churro sheep, as you can imagine from the name, what it implies is this breed of sheep was developed by the Navajo Nation down in the Four Corners area, New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado. And so hardiness, ability to thrive, natural mothering, good mothering instincts, ability to eat, a wide variety of terrains is all part of the breed. And as a breeder trying to promote that breed, that's one of our primary selection criteria, so that we continue that tradition. The Navajo Churro Sheep Association also has a very well-documented standard for what these sheep look like, the wool, and how you would evaluate them, identifying certain faults and things that you don't want in your flock. And so we try to breed to that. And even though I haven't been able to quite get all 400 or so registered, we do have the goal to have all of our breeding stock registered. They have to be about 1.5 years old before you can register them, so that the breed association can see whether they meet that standard or not. I think the toughest thing for me is balancing my demands for meat and a larger animal that more fits the meat market, mostly from a cost perspective, because as you guys know, you pay for everything by the animal when you get it harvested and butchered. And if you have an animal that's half the size of a commercial lamb, your costs are twice, what a commercial producer's is. And so, of course, there's a propensity to want to breed up and size up the animal, but I need to balance that with, that's not our breed standard. Our breed is lanky, leggy, kind of tall, kind of lean. But I think the meat quality and the taste kind of make up for that. So, we try to balance both what we need from a market perspective, what we need from a breed perspective, what we need from a management perspective. You had mentioned, the livestock guardian dogs. We also use those. We use 2 different types of livestock guardian dogs. We use, your more standard Great Pyrenees to stay with our flock. And then we also use plot hounds, which is kind of an unusual use of this hound, but it works pretty well because they're very good perimeter dogs, and they can take on any coyote that comes around. You just really don't have to worry about them. And the combination we found, along with hefting the sheep at night, teaching them to come into a central area where we can keep them safe, has really helped us get along with the predators. You can basically hear them at night go all the way around our place and leave us alone, because we've got the right mix of dogs in there.
Great, thank you. I don't want to take up too much time, but if you guys, Lisa mentioned breed registries, and for rare breeds, the Livestock Conservancy is a great source of roughly how many sheep in each type of breed are registered, which is a handy measure of born each year. So if you're interested in some of these, that's a great source for data and what those breeds are like and how many there are. And Janet.
I want to say one issue is that a lot of the registries do not recognize colored sheep in that registry.
That's true.
So there is the Natural Colored Wool Growers Association, and you can register with them. And they will take any breed of sheep provided there was color in the background. On our place, we now have 60 acres. We started with 40, and we had some issues of overgrazing, not realizing that bottomland cannot continually sustain a certain number of sheep. So I had to downsize a little bit, and also started in with rotational grazing and using electric mesh sheep fence, and that's worked very well. Figured out that you can take a big 10-acre fenced pasture area and split that up into maybe 6-7 areas, and then rotate the sheep every 4 or 5 days from one area to the next. We also use guardian dogs. I've started out with Pyrenees, and I've gone over to a cross that I really like of a Maremma, Pyr, and either Anatolian or Akbash. They're good about staying with the sheep, but they're also a little bit larger, and they will go out over the fence if they need to take care of coyotes or other predator issues. In terms of health, I try to make sure and not continue to breed any of my sheep that have health issues, whether it be skin issues or legs that tend to knock in. I've been really lucky with not having foot rot issues, and over the years have only had 1 or 2 that then became mutton at a later date, so that they were out of the flock. I also winter my sheep in a higher paddock area, and we raise grass hay, and I do still have to purchase some alfalfa to keep the wool quality up, but between about 1/3 alfalfa and the rest are grass hay, that's what they're fed through the winter months. I also don't want to be compacting the land because we're on the flat valley land, and if they were out trying to graze in those areas this time of year and it's wet, they'll really compact the soil. So they're in about a 3-acre paddock for the winter months, and then we'll go back out.
Great, thanks. We have about 15 minutes for our next 3 questions. Try to get a little. We'll take questions at the end. What has enhanced or hindered, besides the drought, the market for your wool in the last few years, if you do indeed market your wool? And how do you think your breeding has influenced your access to markets?
Well, since no one has Perrindale sheep,
Yeah, it is, right, when you have a very rare.
yeah, and we just found with coarse wool, you just really can't sell on the commercial market. And we looked really hard. We have a really good relationship with Wool Gatherer Carding Mill, and it's not a real big business, but they're really good people. And they're fairly close to us. They're up off of I-5 near Etna or Wairika, and they make a really high-quality bedding product also,
Great.
which I sleep on.
Nice.
But I really think that someone needs to start making some wool work jeans
I agree. I want some myself.
with double knees and lots of deep pockets.
Yes. Here, here.
Yeah, but we've got coarse wool, so it's way different than the fine wool folks.
It'll wear
Yeah.
well in our work jeans.
Right. Eureka, up in Humboldt County, there used to be 300,000 sheep, and there may be 1,000 now. There's just no sheep left, and there used to be 2 wool mills in Eureka. And
more
I
in Humboldt.
believe if I read back through the Humboldt County wool growers documents, that Humboldt County wool used to be some of the most sought after.
Absolutely true.
Yeah. So it's.
We'll bring it back.
Okay.
It'll take a while.
Who's going to do the work?
You and Dan. Dan.
Very similar, I think, to Jill's experience. One of the things that's challenging for us is that sheep typically don't shear real well when they're first lactating. And so because we time our lambing to our rapid grass growth, we shear a little bit later than we should in terms of the quality of our wool. Sometimes we're on that line between the grass drying out and particularly the fillery drying out and getting the wool off our ewes. One of our challenges, we've done some direct marketing, we've done some direct to wholesale, and we've also worked with one of the wool brokers, with Roswell. Our wool is so unusual that it takes them usually till Christmas time or the following year to build up enough of our kind of wool to offer it as a lot. And so I shear and pay the shearer in May and hopefully get paid sometime in January, the following January or February, just because it takes that long to build up enough of that kind of wool. I think the other piece that's similar to me, having tried direct marketing, there's not enough time in the day to do what I currently do. And so figuring out some ways to co-op or to create a more higher value wholesale market for those of us that are in the business of raising sheep, I think would be really helpful.
Thank you so much.
Our wool is also coarse wool, so I have the same issue. It comes in a wonderful variety of colors, so I do have some hand spinners who take some of the fleeces, but we produce tons of it each shearing. So a lot of it has gone into my neighbor's housing as insulation. I've got a lady who's building a yurt. She's felting it and building a yurt out of it with this season's shearing. So I'm very interested in those, more manufacturing or industrial type uses. I think wool could be a wonderful insulator if we could get some of the laws changed in various counties. Even in my county, it's not legal to insulate a house with wool. You have to go through and make an exception. So there needs to be some regulatory changes, but it's a wonderful green renewable product that should be used, for insulation. So if I was ever to get some time, which I'm in the same boat as you guys, I want to try to promote that as a use for, it could be for, all of the wool that doesn't make the fashion grade. And I think it would be much, much better to use than fiberglass insulation.
Absolutely.
And the other thing that I would like to look into when I have the time is I'm hearing a lot about burial shrouds. So felting for burial shrouds, the family can, needlepoint or hire an artist to do some sort of pattern on the shroud and use it for a more natural burial. So
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Janet, how about your marketing?
I've been pretty much targeting the different trade shows with the yarn and hand spinner fleeces, and I've noticed that recently the hand spinner fleece market is not what it was. I'm not sure why that trend is changing, but I'm having to put more of the fleeces into yarn, and so that's something that I'm going to need to be addressing. Trying to work more with local yarn shops and get some of my items in there. And I think educating the public to wear more wool is a really, really big issue. Even places like LL Bean and some of the other Land's End that are supposed to be more oriented towards natural fibers and wearing more natural fibers, they keep talking about fleece, and it's not a wool fleece.
Janet, ballot measure.
Yes.
Yes, we need a proposition.
So those are some of the issues, and something I wanted to mention before and I didn't get a chance to is that it's really, really important to keep good records on your sheep. And so that you can put together rams with the ewes in good quality. So.
Thank you. In terms of wearing wool, I'd be remiss if I didn't do a little product placement. I'm wearing one of the Meridian Jacobs beautiful shawls from back in the corner by Robin Lime. So get some wearable wool while you're here. Okay, question back to the topic at hand. In your opinion, starting with Jill, what do you think we need to do to grow the quality of good or improve the quality of good wool fiber in our region, knowing all your regions are different, and knowing that some regions are always going to produce a higher or lower micron count, finer or coarser wool based on their climate? We know high desert produces finer wool generally, but all that taken into account, what do you think we need to do to improve wool
Animal
quality?
husbandry would be number one. Make sure your animals are well taken care of and live a pretty stress-free life. We also use livestock guardian dogs, and the sheep actually find comfort in those dogs,
They do.
which is really neat. I think if they didn't have the dogs at this point, they would probably really be a mess. Just taking really good care of our sheep, making sure they're well fed and well taken care of. Sheep require a lot of work compared to cattle. Cattle can pretty much do on their own with maybe getting them in a couple times a year, but we pretty much go through all of our sheep every 2 weeks and look for problems. or issues. We just have to keep up on that.
Yeah, sheep are great for hiding things until it's serious.
Yeah,
They'll, like,
they're prey animals, and
Yep.
if you find a sick one, usually it's too late.
Yep.
So you really have to keep up on that stuff.
Thank you.
There's one of my favorite authors, a guy named Ivan Doig, who wrote in a book called Dancing at the Rascal Fair, that to be successful with sheep, even when you're not thinking about them, you need to think about them a little. And I think that's kind of the approach you have to take to keeping sheep healthy. I think the other, thinking further through that whole production cycle, I think as we develop more markets for the kinds of fibers that we can produce in California, that there are enough people younger than me interested in doing this now that we'll start to see some people really trying to figure this out again. Our part of the world was, most of the cattle ranches were originally bought with sheep. People kept sheep till they paid off the ranch, and then they
Bought
realized...
with wool.
Exactly. Right. Actually, in 1919, there were people that bought ranches with their wool check from that year. So we need to have
And
that.
that's coarse wool.
We need to kind of have that back again. That's right. That's right. So I guess that is the other piece of it. If we can find more markets, that helps too.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would just echo what they say about sheep management, and then just expanding the definition of what is great wool. I mean, there certainly is the clothing market and, wonderful apparel, and yes, we need to get people to wear more wool, but let's expand the idea of the kind of fibers that we can hopefully someday in the future profitably produce so that we can keep going.
Thank you.
Something that I think is really important is the quality of the wool in the sense of keeping it clean. I've way too often seen people discouraged when they want to work with wool, and it's full of stickers and lice eggs, all sorts of things. Healthy sheep stay on top of parasites, and also, even though it's a real effort, if you can cover those sheep and it's a finer quality and you're trying to cater to the finer quality, it's so important. Or if you can't do that and you are able to have them on irrigated pasture where they can be sheared before the stickers happen, that's really, really important.
Thank you. And for our last question today, what are some things that you'd like the public to understand about your breed in particular, especially since many of them are so unusual, we don't know a lot about them, there are so few, or your breeding efforts in general, or just anything else that you'd wish people could understand about your work?
We've got all day, right?
Yeah, right. 1 hour each.
The Perrindale sheep are, if anyone's ever been around Cheviot sheep, they kind of know how they handle. They're real free moving, easy care. You don't really need to use dogs in pens with Cheviots or Perrindales. And they're super easy to handle, very adaptable sheep. They're not very large sheep. They're kind of shaped like a potato. They've got a nice slope to their butt end like a Cheviot, and that's for hill climbing. Hill ponies have the same thing. And they've got a lot of capacity for grass. But they're just really bright, alert, real clean face, clean legs. I've got a few raw fleeces here if anyone wants to come up and feel them.
Great.
They're quite soft. I actually might be able to wear that against my skin. They have real low grease weight, so when you get a raw fleece, you don't have a lot of loss there. They shear a lot of wool too. Our rams we shear twice a year. We'll shear our yearling rams about 12 pounds twice a year.
Wow.
So
That's a lot.
They're a long wool definitely. So.
See, that's a great combination. A lot of wool, but they're not too large and no wool on their face and their legs means the shearer is happy to come to your place.
Robert Irwin?
Reasonably happy.
Yeah,
Yes.
reasonably happy.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, my mother-in-law.
There we go.
Yeah.
Feed your shearers. Dan, how about yourself? What would you like people to know about your breed, your efforts?
About our breed, I think we're kind of similar in some respects, I think. I think everybody that raises sheep, regardless of the number, ought to have something made from their wool that they wear, because it does give you some idea about what it's like. I've got one hat knit by somebody over here, and another hat that my daughter knit me, and that's not only a cool thing to do, but also really nice wool to wear. I'm going to ask you all a favor. Jill and I have been doing photographs of our sheep for a long time, and I started something on Instagram called Sheep 365 that has been really cool, and you guys are all going to be that picture today. If you're okay with me taking your picture.
Hashtag Sheep365 if you're interested in participating. All right.
So look for Flying Mule Farm on Instagram.
Thank you. And Lisa, are you done, Dan? Sorry. I didn't want to cut your comment short for the photo in the social media. Lisa, how about yourself?
I'd say in general, I'd like sheep to get a little bit more respect. A lot of people I talk to think they're little dumb animals and they kind of just,
Absolutely.
move around and don't have personalities, and it's just quite different. They have a different type of intelligence, not that they're rocket scientists, but they do have a different type of intelligence. Sometimes it's a very frustrating type of intelligence, but they are personable, and they're like one of the most useful animals that I've ever seen. I mean, how many other animals do you get, fiber and milk and meat and grazing services? I mean, they should get a lot more respect out there. On the Navajo churros, they're wild. They're wily, they jump, they figure things out on their own. If they don't want to be in one pasture, they're going to get in the other. They take care of themselves. They are pretty attuned to danger. I can know when something's going on in the field because they will bring themselves in. They just have a pretty wild personality. Some people might not like it, but I like it a lot. I respect it. And they're not the males aren't aggressive towards humans, even with those huge horns. You can pretty easily handle them and don't have to be afraid of them. So I just think it's a great breed of sheep, and they're very tasty too.
They are. Nice mild flavor.
Very mild flavor. We sell a lot of lamb. We have 2 major farmers markets and sell a lot of lamb.
Nice. Dan, did you want to add something there?
I just want to add something that if any of you know the Hamilton family in Rio Vista, David Hamilton's in his 80s, and he told me a couple weeks ago, people say sheep are dumb, but he tells them that people have to be smarter than the sheep they're handling to do it well. And most people fail that test.
Yes, they do. I love it. That's great. Janet, can you close us out today?
Yes. Well, one of the things I didn't mention earlier was in Round Valley, where Covelo is, there were 300,000 sheep up there. That was sheep country, and now there's maybe 350 total in the whole valley. Yeah. So times have really, really changed. I really like the merino sheep, always have. The rams, though, can be rather aggressive. In terms of my breeding program, I keep 5 rams, and people go, "What?" At least 5, and they go, "Why do you have so many?" Well, it's the color genetics, and I want to keep different lines, so I can always go back and use one of those other rams if I want to in the future to bring in a certain color or certain micron count. And I do occasionally bring in a new ram, but it's not very often. In terms of what I've done over the years, I've tried to really improve it so that I could have lamb and wool, which is a really hard feat because the merinos tend to be a little more on the small side. So I've tried to get what they call a good hanging carcass for lamb, in addition to having the really good wool quality. I think, not sure what else to say there. So.
Great.
Take it away.
Well, thank you. Do we have time? Oh, I'm Stephany Wilkes. Rebecca wants me to tell you who I am. I'm a wool grader and a sheep shearer. Hi. And I love all these folks, and they're doing the most important work there is to be done. So let's have a big hand for our panel. Thank you. And we do have room. I think we've got time for 2 questions, and I know there was somebody who had one earlier, and I put you off. What's your question?
I want to know more about the guardian dog
Okay, so everybody can hear, that was a question about guardian dogs, what kind people have, whether or not they breed their own, and why the sheep would be a mess without guardian dogs, and or dead.
We do not breed our own. I'm not breed specific. We have some straight Akbosh, some Pyrenees Maramas, and some Caracachans. They're all different. Most important is their behavior around the sheep. A lot of them aren't sheep safe. You can't just get a puppy and put it out there with the sheep. Sheep are fun to chase.
Yeah.
Really fun to chase. And so there's quite a bit of schooling involved, and they're almost impossible to keep in, almost impossible. Very rarely do you have one that will really just stay with the sheep and not try to get out if it needs to. What was the third?
Why would they be a mess?
Oh. Well, if you're out there with your sheep and dogs, they look to the dogs. Especially if you're rotating, we rotationally graze also. And they wait for those dogs, and when those dogs go, they go with them. The dogs are a big alert system to them also. Our sheep will not let our dogs crawl all over them. You see pictures of livestock guardian dogs sleeping on sheep. Ours move off because they're high strung, but they do. They really look to those dogs. They almost admire them.
We use, not so specific on the breeds, but the type of dog. I almost won't take pasture that's somebody tells me is fenced for sheep because my dogs won't stay in it. They will stay in electronet, and so that's what we use. We have bred dogs. Right now, we're not doing it. I think the most important thing for me is getting a dog to start myself, because I know what I want that dog to end up doing. And I have not yet found somebody that thinks they know how to breed dogs that doesn't also raise sheep that does that job well. I think we're going to have bigger and more dogs when we get bigger and more predators in our country, and that is going to be a challenge, I think.
Anyone else?
I just wanted to address the predator issue. Where I live, we have mountain lion, we have bobcat, we have coyote, we have bear, and there's also feral dogs. And the feral dogs problem is probably the worst of all that I've mentioned. People, more and more come into the area, they're not aware, they just turn their dogs loose, and then it's, oh, my foo-foo could never do that to your sheep. And I've seen the results numerous times of what happens when a dog pack gets in. They don't stop at one sheep. They can finish off 50 sheep very, very quickly.
And where Janet and I live, marijuana is the number one crop. And almost everyone has unspayed, unneutered pit bulls. Almost everyone. And so there's dogs running everywhere, basically. And then they get dropped and discarded. So.
Yeah, our local animal shelter right now probably has the highest number that they've ever had in the last 50 years because of all the abandoned dogs.
And 92% in Humboldt are pit bulls.
Yeah.
Or some sort of.
Yeah, a lot of people are surprised to hear that. It's true for all my customers as well. Most of their sheep are killed by dogs, not anything else. And one more question, John. Okay. The question is, are any of these folks using dewormers to control things like parasites? And what is the effect, if any, of using those dewormers on the soil health? If you know.
Yes, and go ahead, Dan. You can answer this one.
We use the FAMACHA system, so we target deworm. We don't deworm everything. We've found that our lambs are more susceptible to internal parasites, and because we're on irrigated pasture, I suspect we're importing parasites, and so we do deworm the lambs. We use levamisole primarily, and I have not done a soil test, but we've got lots of critters in the soil, so I'm assuming that it's okay.
And a lot of the insects break up the manure before it gets
We've
there.
got lots of dung beetles.
Anyone else?
I have high water table and wet years, and so I do use Valbazine because we do have problems with liver fluke. I try to limit how often but I still feel it's a necessity because you want a healthy animal. You don't want an animal that's debilitated because of parasites. And I have yet to have success with any of the alternative medications out there.
Well, thank you. Oh, sorry, go ahead,
Oh,
Lisa. No.
it's
We have
okay.
time, go ahead,
I
sorry.
was just going to say that since we are shearing twice a year, we look at each of the animals twice a year and just do targeted worming as well. I'd say maybe 10%, 15% we have to worm every shearing, and we rotate various wormers and also do some fecal counts.
Great. Well, thank you. Our next panel will be at 11, True Cost Tales from the Land, and thank you so much to our breeding panel. You guys are the best. Oh, yeah. Yeah, and our panel members say they would be happy to answer any more questions you could have at their booths all around the room and in the other room next door.